Welcome to another episode of the Now and Beyond podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Kelly Augsberger, who is a long-term care insurance specialist, certified senior advisor, and an instructor for the CLTC. Kelly's goal is to create a plan for extended care and reduce the physical, mental, emotional, and financial consequences of an extended care situation. On this episode, Kelly and I talk about a whole bunch of different topics in regards to planning for the future and planning for not just your healthcare expenses, but also your parents. Over my career, I have had a lot of conversations with the millennial and Gen Z generation about what can we do today to help plan to pay for our parents' care or help them with their care, and what can we do today to also plan for our own care in the future. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Now and Beyond podcast, hosted by Ryan Canfield, founder and president of Victus Wealth Management. Whether you're seeking financial freedom, investment insights, or simply looking to optimize your lifestyle, tune in for conversations that empower you to achieve a balance between enjoying the present and ensuring a resilient financial future. Welcome to a podcast where the art of living well today intersects with the science of planning for a brighter tomorrow.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Now and Beyond. I am joined today with Kelly, and the topic that we're going to be talking about is planning for healthcare for aging parents. And I cannot be more excited about this topic. This has been something that a lot of people have reached out to me to talk about. So Kelly, welcome. How are you doing?
Ryan, hey, good morning. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to start, could you give us a little bit of background about you, your company, and why you do what you do?
Sure. So I am a long-term care insurance specialist, and I help people plan for extended care, for future extended care. And so typically I'm working with people that are kind of in that sandwich generation. So maybe they're in their 50s. I do have clients in their 40s, but I have clients all the way up to their really 70s. So there's a wide range of clients that I'm helping, but we're helping to put together a plan in the event they need care, they need assistance throughout the day. And I think we're probably going to define what extended care is and what it isn't as we go throughout this episode, but that's really what I do. And the why behind it is because I am very passionate about having a plan because of personal experience. All of my grandparents needed care. Nobody had a plan. Nobody had a way to effectively pay for their care. And it was very difficult on our family. Each grandparent had a different situation on what that looked like, but I was a caregiver to one of my grandmas part-time in my early 20s. I took some time off work. Fortunately, I did work in a family business at the time, but so I had some flexibility there. But we intimately know the difficulties that happen if you don't have a plan. And so really my mission is let's create plans for families so that they can avoid a lot of the consequences that my family has had to face.
Wow. Yeah, that's been one of the driving things around this episode. I'm hearing from so many clients that are younger, fearing my parents are getting older, they have a little bit of health issues, I really don't know what their plan is. How am I going to balance my career, with the caregiving responsibility? So you had to do that in your 20s.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you
Mid-20s.
how did you manage that? How did you balance that out?
Well, fortunately, at the time, I was working in a family business with my dad, and it was his mom. So I
Okay.
did have that flexibility where my dad was like, absolutely, like, go to Mama's house, so I did not have to do a lot of hands-on physical
Mhm.
assistance with activities of daily living, but I did a lot of transportation and helped with doctor's appointments, helped with picking up the house and some laundry and some light housework, and just helping her in her home with things that she really wasn't able to do as well anymore. But it did come to a point where I realized she was not bathing regularly. Okay, she did not have home care. Like, I was her assistance in the home. And then my dad would come over as well every now and again, but mainly to visit or to fix stuff. Like, he's very good at fixing
Yeah.
stuff. So he would do a lot of that. But, I realized, like, Mama, when was the last time you took a shower? or you took a
Mhm.
bath, and she would have to think about it. And it's like, oh my goodness. She's like, well, I've been using the sink a lot. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like we need to get you in the shower. And so I started to help her bathe in the shower. And at that
Yeah.
point, it was like, oh my goodness, this is over my head. I am not a professional. I am not, a home health aid. I don't
Mhm.
have the skills necessary. I mean, I used to babysit when I was a kid. At that point, I didn't
Yeah.
have kids yet, but like, know the basics of how to help someone. But my grandma was like my size.
Mhm.
So, how do I properly, safely help her? And so at that point for me, it was like, okay, I think we really need to do something more significant here. We need to bring in professionals, or she needs to go somewhere where the caregiving responsibilities are there all the time. And so that's what we ended up doing. She ended up moving to assisted living. That was the right fit for her. And she was happier because she had community there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we went through that with, my mom's mom had always lived with us growing up. And when my parents moved to Pennsylvania, she came along and she unfortunately developed dementia, and
Mhm.
a lot of the caregiving fell on my dad, who was retired.
Mhm.
And my mom would continue to go to work, and somebody with dementia, it can be very challenging. There was times
Right.
where she would walk outside and my dad would have to run down the street to go get her.
Mhm.
And ultimately they decided, hey, like we've got to put her into a home. And fortunately my parents had that conversation with her throughout the years of kind of what do you want your experience to be, like
Yeah.
what's the expectations, and and that conversation is extremely important to have, right, so that what they want.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You need to talk about these preferences up front before the
Mhm.
crisis happens, before they need care. That's so important because you need to know where they stand. Maybe they want to stay at home as long as possible, but you decide to move them to an assisted living. Are they going to be happy there? Are they going to
Yeah.
find what they need there? They're going to get the care that they need, but is that where they're going to really have joy and be happy and content? So having these conversations up front is really important. And Ryan, I think we need to define, before we get into too deep into this episode, I think we really need to define what care is and what it looks like.
Yeah.
Okay, a common term that's used in our industry is long-term care. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, I tend to not use that term. I only use that when it's connected to insurance, long term care insurance. But when we're
Mhm.
talking about needing care, I use extended care because I think it's more comprehensive in nature and it really helps to get away from a lot of the negative connotations that come with long term care. Because when
Yeah.
I say long term care, Ryan, what do you think of?
I immediately go to insurance.
You go to insurance. Okay, well
I
that's
do.
unusual. But because you're in finance, but like your
Yeah.
clients, what do you think your clients think of when they hear long term care?
A lot of times they immediately go to nursing home, end of care life.
Yeah.
That's typically where that conversation leads.
Yeah, absolutely. And while it can mean a nursing home, Ryan, it often is not.
Yeah.
Okay. When we're talking about extended care and planning for that, we're talking about if you need assistance throughout the day.
Mhm.
That's it. Okay.
Yep.
And that could be physical assistance with what we call activities of daily living. We shorten that to ADLs for short. Okay.
Mhm.
But we're talking about transferring, toileting, bathing, dressing, eating, and continence. These are things we do every day we don't even think about, right? We just
Mhm.
naturally do it.
Yeah.
So if you need assistance with those, that's extended care. It could be as simple as I need standby assistance in the shower, like I helped my mama, right?
Mhm.
Okay, I just needed to be near her within arm's reach to make sure she didn't slip and fall. Okay. That's extended care. Or if you need supervision like your grandma with dementia, okay, to make sure you don't walk out the front door and go down the street and get lost. Or
Mhm.
you need those verbal cues of reminders. So,
Yeah.
physical assistance or cognitive supervision, that's what we're talking about when we need extended care. So, most often people are receiving care in their homes. Okay. And most people can stay in their homes if they have a plan and an effective way to pay for that plan. If
Mhm.
they don't, that's often when we see this crisis planning happening, or maybe family members are really having to step in a lot and take time out of the workforce, quit their job, shuffling their lives around to be able to help their family member because they didn't have a plan and a way to pay for that plan.
Yeah. Yeah, and that reminds me of a conversation I've had fairly recently. A local business owner runs a very successful company, and they were kind of panicking because they know the time's coming where mom's going to need a lot more care.
Mhm.
And they've never really had that conversation around like what she wants her plan to be.
Mhm.
And the kid, the business owner, is panicking because she's like, what happens if I make the wrong choice that goes against my mother's wishes? And she's not in the frame of mind where she can verbalize like what her wishes are.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you needed to have that conversation, unfortunately, years ago.
Mhm.
But it's such a uncomfortable conversation to have. Do you have any tips, guidelines, questions that, the millennial and Gen Z can be having with their family?
Oh, absolutely. So, yes, it could be uncomfortable, especially if you're not prepping for that conversation. I think it's really important to remember when you're approaching your parents about planning for care, we need to come to the table with a perspective and a point of view of a lot of compassion and
Mhm.
empathy and concern. Okay. We are not telling our parents what they're going to do. We are asking our parents, listen, I'm really concerned about the future. I've got a business or I've got a job, we've got a family, all these things. Um, do you, mom and dad, do you guys have a plan if one of you were to need help? Have you written down your preferences? Do you have a way to pay for that? Have you talked to your financial advisor on how you're going to pay for that?
Mhm.
Where do you want to be if you need care, mom and dad? Do you want to stay at home? Do you think you might like an assisted living, a nice assisted living? Like there's lots of activities and community there. Have you guys thought about that at all? Right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying, oh, mom and dad, like, gosh, if you become frail and, a burden, I can't take care of you. What are you going to do? You
Yeah.
know, it's we're just having a conversation. It's parents to child. We've got
Mhm.
concern here. Let's talk through this. Let's put together a plan. In a written plan of care, Ryan, what I always recommend is, okay, we're writing this down. We're writing down what we want to happen. That plan might change. Okay, depending
Mhm.
on the circumstance, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we can at least have a baseline. So we're going to identify who who are the caregivers that you want to be in your life. Mom and dad often say, I don't want to be a burden to the kids.
Mhm. I
Let's
hear that a lot.
yeah, let's look to professionals to do the caregiving as much as possible. Okay, so we're going to look to professionals. Do we have reputable agencies in our area? I mean, you could even start looking into home care agencies. Now,
Mhm.
needing care might be 20 years away, right? It might not be soon, but you could at least kind of get their wheels turning. And
Mhm.
they could even jot down some current reputable places. Okay, maybe they know friends that their mom and dad have used X, Y, and Z. Okay, all right, well, let's just think about that. So who are the caregivers? Or if they want their kids to be involved in the process and the kids want to be and can be in that process of caregiving, talk about that. Okay. So we're going to rely on professionals, mom and dad, to like do, the heavy lifting, if you will.
Mhm.
Are you expecting me or do you want me to help in any capacity? What does that look like? Right? Do you want me to like supervise, kind of help coordinate that care, make phone calls? If a home care provider can't come, step in and find a replacement, call them and figure out who's going to step in. Is that kind of what you're thinking? And as a adult child, is that something that you want to do and you think you can do? Logistically and realistically with what responsibilities you have in your life. So it's playing the situation out. If this happens, what do you prefer? What do you think is realistic? Okay.
Yeah.
And then writing that down. So that's the who. And then the where, do I want to be at home as long as possible? Do I prefer assisted living? And that could change. So if we've got mom and dad, but let's say dad passes away and mom's alone, which happens often. Women
Mhm.
typically outlive their husband. So now mom's a widow. Okay, does mom want to do we think mom still might want to stay at home, or do we think she might be really lonely and want community? And if so, okay, well then assisted living might be the better choice there because she wants to be surrounded by people, which is common.
So and do you recommend, like, in that situation, so let's say you have mom and dad still living, um, So you're basically saying write out a plan that says, okay, mom, if something happens to dad, here, would you want to still stay at home or would you prefer to go into assisted living? And then, hey, dad, if something happens to mom, what would you
Mhm.
prefer? So like doing that while they're still both
Yeah,
alive.
for sure. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And while they're cognitively there, and of
Yeah.
sound mind and body, where they can talk through these things. Now, again, this plan might change because maybe dad passes away and mom is perfectly able-bodied and
Hmm.
she's in good health, and she doesn't need any assistance throughout the day and she's just independent. Well, mom might want to still stay at home, okay, because she's still going to church and she's still going to the grocery and she's still doing things on her own and able to get out of the house and she doesn't need assistance. But then maybe the time comes where mom does need assistance. At that
Yeah.
point, then maybe it's okay, mom can't just drive to her friend's house and get together for coffee. She's homebound now. Maybe mom would prefer to be in a community, right, with other
Yeah.
people. So, but these are things to talk about. What does this look like? So that's the where, the who and the where, and then the how, Ryan. How are we going to effectively pay for care? Okay. If the goal is to rely on professional caregivers to do most of the caregiving, well, where are the finances? What are the
Hmm.
finances? How are we going to pay for this? And that's typically where we look to long-term care insurance because it is an effective and efficient way to pay for care. Okay, we get leverage, we get tax-free benefits, we've got other benefits included in our policies, but really identifying how am I going to pay for that plan and that care. Where's the money going to come from? Identifying the buckets of money that will be used to pay for care. Okay. If we have long-term care insurance, well, that's number one. That's what we're going to look to first. That's our foundation.
Yeah.
Now, most often my clients, Ryan, are not buying an enormous policy where they're intending to pay for care with all their policy. Okay. We're not looking at
Hmm.
like $10,000 a month for unlimited benefits. Usually,
Yeah.
we're looking at modest coverage, like between $3,000 and $6,000 a month for maybe between 3 and 5 years with some inflation protection on there. Okay. So that might not cover all their care. If they do need care, let's say their care costs are $10,000 a month and their policy covers 5,000, well, we've got a gap. Okay, but we knew that was a
Yeah.
good potential. So where's that other 5,000 coming from? That's where we want to identify the other buckets of money, and that's where you, like as a financial advisor, comes into play, and you're the one helping to identify those buckets or creating those buckets, okay,
Hmm.
of money to be able to pay for the care.
Yeah, I actually had this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I had a client who had to go into a nursing home and the family never had the conversation of how are we going to pay for this? And this client had a very rare sports memorabilia collection
Okay.
and they ended up selling a lot of it to help offset some of the care.
Mm,
And ultimately they ended up finding like a document. It wasn't a legal document, but it was a document that the dad had drafted that was with the sports memorabilia that said what his intentions were for it.
mm,
And some of the memorabilia was supposed to go to like future grandkids
mm,
and great grandkids. Some of it was, you know, to never be sold.
mm.
Some of it was supposed to be donated to a charity that was very special to his heart.
Oh.
Well, the family went and sold probably about 95% of it to pay for the care. And so
Mm.
like it went against what his wishes were. And the family to this day still kind of like
Mm.
regret it.
Yeah.
And I know they've since tried to purchase some of the memorabilia back. But it was one of those things where I'm like, gosh, if we would have had this conversation
Mhm.
before, none of that would have happened.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if we've got something written down, we know their wishes, we know their preferences, and we want to honor that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Right. So that is why it is really important to plan ahead. And that way, hopefully, we're also avoiding a lot of the consequences like that.
Mhm.
But also, when we think about care, there are physical, mental, emotional, and financial consequences, really, if a family
Yeah.
member needs care. It just naturally happens. But we can minimize those burdens, we can minimize those consequences when we come up with a plan in advance.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, We've talked a lot about like the costs associated with long-term care and extended care planning. Um, to give the listeners an idea, ballpark, how much are we looking at on a monthly basis?
Yeah, well, it depends on where you are in the country, how much
Mhm.
care, and then where you are receiving that care, Ryan. But let's just say I'm in Columbus, Ohio. So, looking at Columbus, if you need part time home care, you're looking at around $6,000 a month. And when I mean part time, I mean like 44 hours of care a week. Okay. So, that's just kind of middle of the road. If you need 24/7 care at home, it's easily over $20,000 a month,
Yeah.
right? It's not chump change. Now, if you need 24 hours of care a day, typically that's when we see people move to like an assisted living. Okay.
Yeah.
Because costs are, you're able to control more because it is like
Mhm.
a monthly rate, but then like assisted livings, they have a base rate. And then again, like if we're looking at Columbus, an assisted living might be around $6,000 a month, but that's probably a base rate just to get in the door. Depending on the
Mhm.
level of care you need, it's going to be more. Okay. There's usually at least like 3 levels of care. So they're going to charge more for how much care you need. If you need more care, obviously they have to charge more because they need more labor, they need more aides to assist you. So they have to pay
Yeah.
that out. Okay. So that's assisted living. If we're talking about skilled care, and now this is nursing home, again, last stop is usually where we are, usually the last place we ever want to be. But if you
Yeah.
end up needing like a private room in a skilled nursing facility in Columbus, you're maybe $9,000-$10,000 a month. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, it's it's something that we need to plan for, and we need to be able to figure out how we're going to pay for this.
Mhm.
Since most people prefer and want to be at home, like for me, that's where I typically focus on with clients is okay, what are typical home care costs in your area for part-time care? Okay.
Mhm.
How do we pay for that with a policy? And then what other funds do you have to fill in those gaps? That's
Yeah.
usually what we focus on.
Yeah. I know from personal experience, we had a family member that was in a dementia unit at a nursing home, and it was around like
Mm.
$25,000 a month.
Memory
And that's in
care.
central PA.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people are like, how do you pay for this?
Mhm.
And especially like the millennial generation who's kind of on that borderline where we're starting to get a little bit more exposed to those costs. We're having that conversation with our families, our parents, we're seeing our grandparents go through it. And, you know, then we sit there and start freaking out because I was never aware of this, but in some states, I think Oregon's one of them, they have laws that says that your like adult child could be responsible for the cost of your parent
Mm.
if they're unable to cover it, which blew my mind. And I have a client that lives out there, and they're the ones that brought it to my attention.
Mm.
So that's what we started having this conversation of what can they be doing? They is like that younger professional. What could they be doing today to help offset that parents' care cost?
Their parents' care costs. Well, have them plan now
Yeah.
before they need the care. So again, having the conversation with them, figuring out what their care preferences are and what they have, depending on mom and dad's health, and their age, maybe
Mhm.
they can still qualify for long-term care insurance. There we have different types of long-term care insurance in the marketplace. We do have some that are a lot easier to qualify than others. We have traditional
Yeah.
insurance where it's just standalone coverage. It's usually the most strict in underwriting and harder to health qualify for. And then we have hybrids where we're combining life insurance with long term care coverage. And then we also have a hybrid where we have coverage for extended care, but we also have cash value in an annuity. So depending on what their health is,
Mhm.
health needs to be assessed to see, can we get mom and dad, can we get coverage now? You might be 70, but there still might be something that you can get. We actually have options, right, up to age 87. Okay.
Wow.
So, mom and dad can't be in their 90s, but
Yeah.
I mean, even in their 80s, they could still potentially get some type of coverage, get some leverage, get some tax free benefits. But outside of that, it's okay, again, what are your finances? Who's your financial advisor? Like we need to come up with a way of how we're going to pay for this. So let's talk with your financial advisor if you haven't already talked to them. And then seeing locally, like within your state, are there any benefits that your parents could possibly be eligible for? Like if they're low income, if they have low assets, do we have benefits available in your area? Okay. Contacting the local central, like in Ohio, we have the Central Ohio Agencies of Aging.
Hmm.
Okay. And
Hmm.
so we call it AAA. And so, contacting them to see what kind of benefits might be available for your parents, just to figure out kind of what's on the menu. Now, if mom and dad have very low assets, okay, that's typically when we look at Medicaid. Okay.
Hmm.
You're going to have to mom and dad are going to have to use their assets first, spend down to the state's Medicaid asset limits, and then Medicaid would step in. Now, Medicaid is not preferable. Okay. It's not a
Hmm.
pleasant experience. You're going to go where the state tells you to go. Okay.
Yeah.
Which often is a nursing home, unfortunately, but it's a backstop and it's last resort. It's there if mom and dad do run out of money and they don't have the money to be able to pay for care anymore.
Yeah. Now I do know, like, in the Medicaid situation, I've had some clients they've had to go that route.
Mhm.
But they knew that in advance. So they were able to start having conversations with certain homes, independent care, nursing homes and everything. And almost come up with a plan of, hey, like, here's this person, they're going to have to be on Medicaid. Will you accept them? What does this look like? So they were able to actually tour some different
Yeah.
facilities, and they found some. I know one in particular found a really nice facility, which we were actually shocked that it was they were able to get in there with Medicaid. But again, it was because of that proper planning,
Yeah.
and rather than waiting to be in the hospital, and then the hospital says, hey, they have to go to a skilled facility, nursing home. Well, then, I mean, it could be hours away. Like, they're going to put them
Right.
in a home that has a first opening no matter where they're at,
For sure.
which is kind of scary.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that is the default there, Ryan. Now, so, there are facilities where if you self-fund for a certain period of time,
Mhm.
they'll allow you to stay.
Yeah.
Okay. Not all facilities are like that. So it
Yeah.
really is like you have to do your shopping. You want to work. Actually, there are professionals out there, Ryan, where they can help, tour different communities and facilities, and they can
Hmm.
guide you and direct you into these are the facilities where you self-pay, but then eventually if you need that Medicaid assistance, they will allow you to stay. Okay. But again, not all will do that. So it's definitely like you
Yeah.
got to do your homework, work with a professional to help you do that. There's senior
Yep.
advisors out there all over the country that can help in that process. But yeah, you want to do this in advance. But that is specifically, for communities, for facilities.
Yeah.
Again, if mom and dad want to stay at home, okay, how are we going to pay for this? Who's going to step in to pay for the care and or provide the care? Where are these funds going to come from? Also to consider too, if mom or dad is a veteran, okay, there could
Yep.
be VA benefits available to them. Now, this is also going to be based on assets, going to be based on income. They're going to do financial underwriting, as well as what kind of assistance you need. The more severe the disability, the more severe the need of care is, the higher priority you have. But then they also need to have served during an act of war. Okay.
Mm.
So those are all things to consider. Like the VA office can guide you through that process. There are even some home care agencies that specialize in this that can help and give you information on how to kind of navigate the VA
Yeah.
assistance. But typically that is also going to be like, you're going to be in a VA specific facility. Okay.
Hmm.
Or you're going to work with a home care provider that you're paying out of pocket, but then the VA possibly might be able to step in as well and provide some benefits. So, there are lots of things to navigate here, but the point is like the further you do this in advance and come up with a plan of care, the better options mom and dad are going to have.
Yeah.
Okay. And which means you are also going to be better protected as the adult child.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So we've talked a lot about how to have that conversation and what that conversation looks like with our parents. I know I have sat in meetings where we have a husband and wife who have never had this conversation.
Mhm.
They're young professionals. We start talking about what's the plan for caring for, mom and dad should something happen. And a husband has one idea,
Mhm.
the wife has a completely different idea, and then almost an argument starts to happen of, well, why is your parents going to get better care than my parents? Or, I don't want, my in-laws moving in with me, or,
Mhm.
I don't want mom and dad having to move to go be with my brother or my sister or something like that. So,
Mhm.
um, I had come up with a list of some questions that, I encourage, spouses to sit there and have this conversation just as often as you're trying to have that conversation with parents. Are you seeing younger professionals not having this conversation, or are they like avoiding it with each other?
Oh, they
Or
avoid
do
it.
they just not even know that they need to have this conversation?
Yes, both. So
Okay.
avoiding the conversation and or not thinking that they need to have the conversation. Like just
It's kind of like that life
unaware.
insurance conversation, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
like it's uncomfortable. Like you don't want to sit there and think about, God forbid something happens to my wife,
right.
and but it's extremely important to have that conversation.
It is. But I think, Ryan, that conversation is almost easier, the life insurance conversation, than the long-term care, like insurance or the
Really?
extended care. Yes. And the reason is everybody knows they're going to die, right?
That's true.
Everybody, okay, at some point, the Lord's going to take me. Like, I'm not going
Yeah.
to live forever, okay?
Yeah.
We are guaranteed, at some point we will pass away. We are not guaranteed becoming frail. We are not guaranteed losing our mobility. That is not a guarantee that we will need care. It's highly likely. It's
Mhm.
very highly likely that we will need care, but it's not a guarantee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially if you're a female.
So
Like,
if
yeah.
yeah, females, we tend to need more care and for longer amounts of time than men.
Mhm.
Okay. Because we typically live longer. We usually live about 5 years longer than men.
Yep.
And just due to the longevity factor, Ryan, since we're living a longer life, it's reasonable that we also might need care and might need more care. And
Yeah.
also, women, we are typically caregiving before we need care. And that tends to wear down our own health and our own just bodies. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it does take a toll on you physically. Okay. When you are providing
Yeah.
that care. So, because women, we typically need more care and for longer, it's, well, gosh, women, we really need a plan for care. And so do our husbands. Okay. Our
Mhm.
husbands do too. Like, my husband's a foot taller than me. Okay. And a lot bigger than I am. And
Yeah.
so, I'm not going to be able to help transfer my husband like from a chair to a sofa or from the bed. I'm just
Yeah.
physically not good. I'm, strong. I work out, but I am not going to be, especially like if I'm in my 80s, I'm not going to be able to do that. Like that's
Yeah.
just unrealistic. So how who's going to provide that care for my husband? You know, we need a plan, okay?
Mhm.
And a way to pay for that plan. So, you know, I'm 40, Ryan. So at my age, most people are not developing plans of care yet. Most people are waiting until like mid 40s or even 50s or even later. But is it
Mhm.
still important to have a plan at 40? Absolutely. You don't have to have everything figured out now, but even starting the conversation with your
Mhm.
spouse and your financial advisor, okay? Especially if you have any family experience and you know what kind of that looks like. You've seen it play out in your family before, which I have. And so it's talking to my husband like, okay, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? Who would we look to? We have kids,
Mhm.
so would we want our kids involved? No, I don't want my kids providing care for me. I don't want them to have to give up their life to do that. Okay,
Yeah.
so what is the plan? What are we going to do? Now, at this point in our lives, we are not ready for a full like traditional long-term care insurance policy where it's just coverage for LTC, okay?
Mhm.
What we are ready for is maybe like a hybrid product where we have a permanent life insurance policy and we're able to accelerate that death benefit. Okay. So that my priority right now is life insurance and disability income and coverage. Those are my priorities right now. And probably for most of your viewers as well,
Yeah.
is when you're in your 20s, your 30s, and even your early 40s, it's we need life insurance, we need disability insurance. But if you have a permanent life policy, you can add a long-term care rider on there so that if you need care, you can accelerate that death benefit. Now, the caveat to that is those LTC riders where they're just accelerating the death benefit, we don't have inflation protection, meaning that death benefit's not growing over time. Okay. Whereas like traditional LTC coverage, we've got inflation protection or true hybrid linked benefit policies where we have that death benefit, but we also have another bucket of money. We call that like an
Mhm.
extension of benefits. We have the ability for inflation protection on those. Okay. But at this point, like with just a life policy with an LTC rider, we're not getting growth. But guess what? Right now, I'm not super concerned about that. I'm thinking like worst case scenario, what if I get in a terrible car accident?
Yeah.
Okay. And I end up needing care. I don't pass away. But I can accelerate that death benefit and use it. Or like I've got a DI policy. So on my DI policy, Ryan, I have a rider, a CAT rider, a catastrophic rider, so that if I need care, I have money to supplement my income, right? To cover my income, but I also have money coming in to pay for care.
Yeah.
Okay. So different things to consider when you're younger versus being a little bit older. Like what's your
Yeah.
priority right now in life? What stage of life are you in, right? We still have kids at home. Like again, the life insurance, the DI is a higher priority, and saving for retirement, like that's a higher priority right now.
Yeah.
Eventually, I am going to get that, that traditional policy where I have robust coverage, robust benefits. But different stage.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. A lot of the younger generation thinks they have to do everything at one time and
No.
they become overwhelmed. And it's like, break it down into phases. Like, let's tackle what's most important to you. And then we'll move into phase 2 and then
Right.
phase 3. And just because you might have, a friend who is talking about, let's say, long-term care, they're like, hey, you got to do this right now. They're probably talking about it because they had personal experience with it, where somebody that's never had the personal experience with it might not even have heard about, extended care or long-term care. And I know, so like, I think about like my personal situation. Like I have a brother with special needs, and my wife and I, even when we first started dating, um, she had asked me, "Hey, what's the plan? Something happens to your parents. What happens with your brother?
Mhm.
What does that look like?"
Mhm.
Um, and like looking back now, I'm like, wow, like that was a very deep conversation to have, especially when we started dating, we were 16, 17.
Yeah.
And we're having that conversation, which actually impacted my career path because I was going to join the Marines. Like that was the plan all along.
Hmm.
And, my wife, girlfriend at the time sat there and she's like, hey, something happens to you, think about what happens to your brother,
Mhm.
which then ultimately like affects his life as well. So it's like we were having this same conversation, just focused more on my special needs brother,
Mhm.
not necessarily the parents.
Oh, yeah.
And now we've had that conversation of like I mentioned earlier, my grandmother, my mom's mom, lived with my parents her whole entire life. From the day my parents got married, 3 months after they got married, my mom's dad passed away and my mom's mom moved in.
Mm.
And my parents were married at 19 years old.
Wow.
So, and she just passed away last week, actually, at 93.
Mm.
So that's a long time. And that pretty much changed the course of like my parents' life. But that was a conversation that my mom and dad had when my mom's dad passed away.
Mhm.
My dad promised, like, I will take care of, you know, my mom,
Yeah.
for as long as she's around, I will take care of her.
Mhm.
And he made that promise to my mom's dad and my mom. And
And being so young, Ryan. Oh my goodness.
correct.
19? Wow.
Yeah. Like that's a big promise to make.
And keep.
And
Yeah.
but that was the plan, and we've had other family members, we've had friends saying, I can't believe like your dad was able to do that and blah blah blah. And it's like that was the plan.
Yeah.
So like now, since like my wife and I have had, that conversation of like, okay, something happens to one of our parents, what is this going to look like? And we come from two different experiences. Like I grew up with my grandmother at home because she needed to be taken care of. My wife didn't.
Mhm.
So my outlook is, oh yes, I'm going to open my doors up. My parents are going to come here if they need to, stuff like that. My wife's like, and she's from the medical field. She's a nurse, so
Mhm.
she knows everything. When it comes to taking care of somebody and all the ADLs and everything like that. And she goes, you don't want to do that, Ryan. She's like, you won't be able to do that.
Mm.
And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. And ultimately, like, what's going to be the best care for our parents
Right.
in that situation?
Right. And that's going to be different for each family.
It is.
Your personal experience really affects your perspective on it. And but what are mom and dad's preferences? What's their health like? But I think it's important to know too, Ryan, you don't have to be sick to need care. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Health, like a couple of my grandparents were actually in pretty darn good health most of their lives, but they needed care because of other complications. Like even
Hmm.
my mama that I helped, like she really was in pretty darn good health, but she just started to lose strength, muscle mass, balance, those types of things. Okay. Just because of
Yeah.
living a long life. So if that's the case and you need to physically help your family member, your mom or dad do that, having that standby or hands on assistance throughout the day, every day, that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Can we actually do that as adult kids? Do we want to do that?
Hmm.
Are they going to come in our home or would we go to their house and do that? Would we stay throughout the day?
Yeah.
8 to 5, 9 to 5? Would we have family members taking turns? That's often why we look to professional caregivers because it's a lot. Like it really
It
is.
is.
And we see a huge caregiver burnout. I mean, we think about like the spouses that are either the caregiver or maybe it's adult child, somebody in their family that's doing that caregiving day in and day out. It wears down
Mhm.
on them physically, mentally, and emotionally. And
Yeah.
affects them financially too if they're taking time out of the workforce. The caregiver burnout is very real. So
Yeah.
figuring out a way of how do we avoid that as much as possible is important.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, like, I mentioned earlier, like my dad was taking care of my mom's mom, really in the morning, early afternoon, while my mom continued to work part time. And, I would always have that conversation with my mother. I'm like, hey, like you don't need to work anymore. Like, my dad's been retired for a long time, 7, 8, 9 years, something like that. I'm like,
Okay.
why don't you just stop working? She goes, it gets me out of the house, gives me a mental break
Yeah.
from being a caregiver
Yeah.
because otherwise she was all afternoon, evening, throughout the night,
Yeah.
and towards the end, before my grandmother went into a home, my mom was up all night with her,
Hmm.
and then would turn around and go into work. And it was like, she was never sleeping. She was
Nope.
constantly getting sick. And, you know, mood, she was just always down.
Yeah.
And that's what ultimately led to the decision of we gotta put her into a home. And they had that conversation with my grandmother before dementia really took over and stuff, and that was the expectation. And and I know, having that conversation with my parents, as much as I sit here and I say, oh yeah, like, I'll open my doors, you're more than welcome to come in here, we'll take care of you, my parents are like, absolutely not.
Mm.
Like, there's no way. And they know that, like, again, with my whole company, it's around experiencing life today, rather than waiting until your golden, quote unquote, golden years.
Yeah.
They know that if something happened and they needed, like, me to take care of them, that then changes my life, my wife's life, my kids' life.
Mm.
And they don't want that. So that, again, that's a conversation that we've had. And that changed my extended care plan for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When your parents are living that day in and day out for
Yeah.
years,
Mhm.
they have felt that physical, mental, emotional impact. And
Yeah.
so they don't want that for their own kids. They're like, "Listen, we don't want to do this to you. We know how difficult it was. Let's figure out a better way."
Yeah. Well, Kelly, this was a absolutely fantastic conversation. Extremely important, especially not just the younger generation, but also that generation that's in that pre-retirement, retirement stage. Um, any last minute questions, comments, things you want to say on this topic?
Yeah. So, we've said this multiple times, so plan ahead. Don't wait until mom or dad needs the care, that their health has deteriorated or, their bodies are slowing down to have these conversations. Do it now. But also in that extended care plan, Ryan, I think it's really important for the adult children to also ask their parents, like, do you have an estate plan? Have
Mm.
you updated it recently? Right. And when I say estate plan, I mean, do we have like a living will, a trust? Do we have POAs, medical,
Yeah.
financial? Those are really important too. And those go hand in hand with their extended care plan. So we want to make sure that those documents have been completed and updated. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe mom and dad did
Updated.
them 25 years ago, but things have changed. People have grown
Yeah.
up, right? You're an adult now. And so those things need to be updated, and you need to know where these things are and who the professionals are in their lives. So if you don't know who their financial advisor is, their attorney, their accountant, their doctor, like these people, these people in their lives are really important for you to know, like how to get a hold of them too, and where those documents are. Something that I've created and I'm happy to share with your listeners or viewers is that I call it a family roadmap. And it's a guide to extended care planning and end of life planning. And I think you might have something a little similar, Ryan, that you give to your clients. But basically it's like a 45-page document, but it outlines like, hey, these are the things we need to consider when planning for extended care. And it's fillable. So you answer the questions. What are your preferences? Where, like location of documents, who the important contact people are. And then also like, here are things to do like the first year after you lose a loved one, like the first month, second month, third month. Because when we're in these difficult situations, Ryan, we're so overwhelmed by grief or concern that we're not thinking clearly and we don't know what to do. It's just we're trying to put one foot in front of the other, Yeah. And so if you have something written down and in a place that you know of and it's been updated, you can reference that document and go back to it in that time of need. So I highly recommend, reach out to me. I'm happy to share or just create your own, write these things down, talk to your parents, have them write them down so that you know who to contact and you know where to look when the time comes that they might need some help.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Kelly, where can people find you?
Yeah. So my company is Steadfast Insurance, LLC. We are an independent insurance agency just outside of Columbus, Ohio. So you can go to our website, steadfastagents.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Kelly Augsberger with a P, and I'm sure you'll have the spelling of my last name in the episode, Ryan. Also on Instagram, Facebook, but the best places are probably our website and or LinkedIn. You can reach out to me and find me there. I also have a podcast. It's called Steadfast Care Planning, and I'm on all the podcast platforms and on YouTube. I talk to industry professionals and how do we best navigate older, like issues that older adults face, and how do we best plan. So you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, I'll have all of those linked in the show notes. But Kelly, I really appreciate you hopping on here and talking to me and talking to my listeners. And I look forward to some future conversations.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Thank you.
Take care.
The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor. Member FINRA SIPC.